Welcome to Creative Conversations. Today I'm joined by the amazing Jessamy Gee and the amazing Alice Edy. Welcome to you both.
Thanks,
Hi,
Ian.
So I'm well aware that you're both amazing artists. I have enormous respect for the kind of work you do, which we're going to dive into very soon. But also, you're the hosts of a podcast called the Imposter Syndrome Club. Maybe we can start by learning a bit more about that.
I wear a few hats in my professional creative life. One of them is running my business Think in Colour, in which I do graphic recording work, which I'm sure we'll talk about at some point. And another is as the host of the Creative Mornings Melbourne chapter. This feels like we're starting at birth for this story, but it's relevant, I promise.
No, that's great. That's great.
Creative Mornings is a global breakfast lecture series. It was born in New York City in 2008. And now it's hosted in, I think it's 228 cities and 67 countries all over the world.
Wow.
And every month, all of those chapters showcase a local creative, could be from any creative industry, to speak on a global theme. So they're really broad themes. We had truth, we've had sanctuary recently. So there's really sort of broad themes, and you find someone to sort of loosely speak to that theme. Now, I took over the host role of the Melbourne chapter at the end of 2020. So thinking, oh, this will be great. Lockdowns are going to be over. And we're based in Melbourne. So 2021 ended up being our most hectically locked down year.
Yeah.
So all of the events ended up being virtual for that year. So one of the themes that came up was dare. And at that time, we'd all been having a pretty rough time in Melbourne. It was hard for us to do our jobs because there was opportunity to do them virtually, but we were disconnected from that. Alice was going through a divorce and obviously locked down with her partner, who she was in the process of separating from.
It was super fun. Highly recommend.
Yeah.
Great time.
What a challenge.
So, partially because I know I have so much love and respect for Alice's work, and I'm sure Alice will tell you a bit of her own story shortly, but she and her partner moved here from South Africa together 5-6 years ago, Alice.
Yeah.
And there is something that I find so incredibly brave about that decision to pick up your whole life and move. And knowing that she was also going through this rough time and having so much admiration for how she was dealing with that at the time, I thought, what better person to speak to the theme of dare? And so the talk that Alice gave for that Creative Mornings event was called the Imposter Syndrome Club.
Ah, right.
So maybe we can find some of the slides that she used for that talk, but it was an incredibly moving, incredibly intelligent, funny, beautiful, touching talk that was basically centered around the idea of we are all members of this club, essentially. Mostly everyone has experienced that at some point in time, that feeling of like, oh no, everyone's going to find out.
Yeah.
Why does everyone else know what they're doing? Why don't I know what I'm doing? And when is everyone going to find out? And the response that we had to that talk was incredible. I think particularly for people in creative industries, you're often working solo and you don't see all of the like hard, icky, weird, messy bits behind it. You see the like beautiful Instagram thing, or the person doing the artist talk about their work, or the thing in the gallery. We don't get the opportunity that often to see all of those like not so sexy parts of each other's processes.
Yeah.
So because we got this amazing response, I was like, Alice, I got an idea.
which is can I just say that phrase is like 50% of my conversations with Jessamy start with that exact phrase, and my response is always just pure terror, and my default answer is like, nope, impossible, can't do it. And Jessamy's like, well, I've already done it, it's started, it's in progress, it's happening.
Oh, excellent.
So I feel like the birth of the Imposter Syndrome Club was very in line with how we work, which is both of us having in bits of the idea and kind of building on it, but sort of flowing off our different ways of working, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Oh, that's really interesting. It's such an awesome topic, and you've done quite a few episodes already, haven't you? heaps.
We just released our 40th episode this
Wow.
morning. So
Congratulations.
thank you.
Yeah, thank
coming
you.
up to a year in a little while, and in some
Yeah.
ways it's gone very quickly, and in some ways I'm like, was there a time where we didn't do this?
Yeah. 40 interviews. That's a lot.
Well, I think a big part of it is also just and this was part of just to the kind of birth story, but like setting up a space where we would intentionally spend time together, because realizing as like I think a lot of people can relate to that feeling where you have these threads or conversations with friends trying to make a plan. And it's just like a series of cancellations, a series of like hopeful plans that turn into cancellations because life is so busy.
Yes.
So we were it was almost like a cheeky way of turning hanging out into something that we could calendar block and prioritize in our work day. And it worked. We get to hang out all the time now, which is the best.
I was going to say, it's obviously working really well.
Yeah, it's been quite incredible. Like, obviously, I mean, I consider Alice to be one of the great loves of my life. You know, not all great loves are romantic, and I happen to have found one. And I think particularly special to find that sort of friendship with someone a little bit later in life. You sort of almost forget that you still can make those like relationships that are that important and that meaningful. But it's also the element of partnership in addition to just friendship. It's quite a new, you know, because even just with working, like I've worked solo for most of my life, and usually when you're working out the dynamics of a partnership, it is with a romantic partner. And I think that's been really interesting as well, and really useful for my self-reflection on like how I work, how that impacts other people. When the ideas engine is turned on, like I got 50,000 ideas. It's like, maybe you just have to like cool it for a sec. Or, you know, working out where that's a strength and where that's a deficit. I think that's been incredibly impactful for me.
We met through being crew knowledge workers in the corporate sort of area. And I think we probably feel as fish out of water as each other in that environment. But yeah, isn't it interesting to kind of dip in and out of that, you know, as often as we both have over the years. You kind of have that objective lens, and where you're in it, but you're just able to kind of observe it maybe to a bit more of a degree than the permanent staff involved in whoever you're working for.
Yeah. And that sort of ends up being quite a lot of the value that you bring too. I think earlier on in my career, you know, speaking of imposter syndrome, I'd be like, what? Like, talk about, oh my God, they're all going to find out. Like, why are they even letting me in the building? Like this.
I
What do they think I know how to do?
Yeah.
It's awesome, isn't it?
But then realizing that like that is why you are there, because you are not from that world, that the unique perspective that you can bring, you see things that you just don't see. It's like the same reason you get an external facilitator to come in to run a workshop, right? Because when you're in the machine of something, there are just really basic things that you don't see. And I think understanding that value, not just like the value of your like artistry or creativity, but just the value of being different is not something to shy away from. Like, that's why you're there, essentially.
You'll be up the front scribing, and the client will say, oh, they're just mesmerized by it. And, you know, basically you're the rock stars of that corporate world. It's so fascinating for them, and it brings a beautiful aspect of their work to them, because not everyone learns in different ways, right?
Yeah, but actually everyone does learn visually, even if they think they don't.
Yeah.
But yes,
it's kind of
not biased. Totally not biased.
Yeah.
But how could you not, you know?
Yeah, that's it. And it's like it's just multiple perspectives, right? It's just different ways of getting the information in. But it's funny though, talking about being like the rock stars.
Yes.
because that's totally true. And you get to be at the front of the room. And I've often thought like how funny it is for like just going to work and doing my job, the amount of like public praise that I get. I'm like just being so used to every time I go to work, like literally getting applauded.
I was explaining this to my partner the other day and I was like, oh, it was so nice. I did a live job and like got 2 rounds of applause at the end. And he looked at me, his eyes were like completely wide.
Wow.
And he was like, is that normal? I'm like, well, normally it's just 1 round of applause. And just
wow.
I was like, oh God.
Wow.
Is this creating a monster? Like,
oh, look, how
everyone
lovely.
should do that at the end of their workday.
Yeah. How do you stay so focused and concentrated? There's so much to capture, and how do you get the balance between enough graphic representation and enough conversational representation? Is that a balancing act, or?
I think now, so I've now been doing it for almost 13 years.
Wow.
And so when I talk to people about it, I think a useful analogy can be to think of it like learning a language. So at the start, you're having to, like, you're working really, really hard. And essentially you're having to do all of that translation on the fly. Like, how am I going to represent this visually? How am I going to synthesize these thoughts? You have to put a lot of energy and work into that. And it's terrifying and it's very, very stressful for, I would say, quite a few years. Right. Still is, right. Yes. Because it's always new. But with time, you become more fluent.
Yeah.
So the mental work that you have to do that translation from words to visuals becomes less and less, and you don't really have to think about it that deeply. It's such a good question, Ian, and I'm still very much searching for the answer, because I try to teach. I do teach graphic recording. I try to do it well. And there are some tools and things you can put in place that are super helpful. But when it comes to like, how do you teach someone synthesis, I've not been able to answer that question other than practice over time.
Yeah, something that I would add to that is this. So there's a game I play with myself for this exact reason, which is basically I have to trick myself into caring so much, because it's only through sincere curiosity that I can maintain that attention. Because I went through a phase maybe 5 years in where I was feeling really cynical. I was like very burnt out. I was taking on too many jobs. I was tired. And I mean, sometimes it's really dry. Like sometimes it's amazing. It's leadership stuff. It's educational stuff, or it's family stuff. It's fascinating. But sometimes it really just is like a bank talking about profits. And it is like, if you go into that not caring, and you've got 8 hours of that, there is absolutely no way you're going to be able to synthesize it, because your brain is just screaming inside your skull for the entire time. So I literally do a thing, and I do it before every job now, where I just make the decision that for that day, I am so curious. I'm like, I want to understand this, like, more than anyone in this room wants to understand it. I want to learn it. Like, if I get examined on this, I'm going to like literally be able to tell you your business's strategy. And weirdly enough, like brains are amazing, but they're also very dumb sometimes. Like I'm a simple creature. I'm like, if I just tell myself that 9 times out of 10, it feels that way. And then I'm like, okay, cool. Then I am curious. And then from that point of curiosity, the synthesis happens naturally, because you are just trying actually to wrap your head around it.
What an awesome frame up for that. That's very clever, and it makes a lot of sense as well.
It also just makes your day, the experience is so much better. Like ever since I've done that, it's like, it's fun. It's a cool and interesting day of learning. And it literally is, it's 3 seconds to just recalibrate my brain. I'm like, oh, this is the most interesting thing in the world to me.
Wow, great realization you had to start to adopt that trick, if you like, mind trick. Yeah,
it's so interesting to hear you say that, Alice, because I feel like I've not been not as consciously, but so often people will ask, like there are a lot of very standard questions you'll get asked from people you bump into graphic recording work. And one of them is like, what's the most boring job you've ever done? Or what's the driest job you've ever done? And my answer to that is always, honestly, they're all pretty interesting to me because it's all like none of them are my world. Like what an honor and a privilege it is, even if it is just a bank talking about profit. Why would like little ratbag Jessamy Gee ever have the opportunity to be in that room and hear what those conversations sound like, even if they are dry and boring? How wild that I found myself in this room, in this situation, drawing pictures and making a living from it. Like, I think I always bring it back to like, if I was to tell 10-year-old Jessamy that, she'd be like, but how? Why are you there? I don't understand this.
It just made me realize it's like the flip side of imposter syndrome, where you're like, no, like you're not trying to discount the imposter factor. You're actually leveraging the imposter factor.
Yeah.
How does one even break into the world of graphic scribing?
Well, for me, so certainly like I've always drawn. My mum was an artist, and I think it's got so much to do with environment, right? When you think of just even like the activities you would do with a kid, a lot of ours were based around drawing and making things because that was mum's skill and her interest.
Awesome.
So it was just one of those things that like that was a thing that I could always hold as true from when I was a little kid. Like Jessamy knows how to draw well. That was always part of my life. In terms of then like turning that into something you make money from, I had zero ideas. And when I was in high school, pretty much the options given to you were you study graphic design, you try to be an independent artist, but don't do that because you'll be starving and never make any money from it, or you're an art teacher. They're kind of the things, like the options presented to you, or at least for me at the time. So I went off and studied multimedia design, which I had absolutely no interest in, really. It seemed like the smart, responsible thing to do because it had all these different facets. You could do, animation or web design or whatever, but I always kind of hated making art with computers. I'm like, well, that was dumb. That was not the responsible choice if I hate it.
Yeah.
And then after that, sort of went and had a bunch of jobs that were like on the outskirts of art. So like working in management, or I worked for a community arts organization running arts programs for young people with disabilities. So it was much more in a supporting role than in the kind of lead role. And it was in one of those supporting roles that I saw someone else doing graphic recording for the first time. So a woman that I was working for ran a conference called Creative Innovation. And that's the first time I ever saw anyone scribing, which was Gavin Blake, who I think you probably know, Ian.
Yeah.
He was based in Sydney. I was based in Melbourne. He came down for this event and I was like, wow, this thing looks terrifying but amazing. And I think I was already feeling the pull away from the work that I've been doing because I don't have any passion around admin, and that's what that job is. Like, it's cool because you get to play in that world, but it's like, that's not what set me on. And that does set some people on fire, but it wasn't for me. And after meeting him and seeing him there, another opportunity came up to do that work in Melbourne, but they didn't have budget to bring Gavin down from Sydney, and my boss didn't like there wasn't the same, not that there's millions of graphic recorders around now, it's still a very niche job. But she was like, oh, there's this job that's come up. They don't have money to pay for Gavin. Do you want to give it a crack? And I was like, okay.
Great opportunity.
And when I look back at that now, obviously I'm mortified at the work. I was quite proud of it at the time.
Well, you've got to start somewhere, haven't you?
Got to start somewhere. But I loved it. I kind of knew in that moment that I was like, this is a legitimate pathway that I could take and really enjoy. So I called Gavin and I was just like, hey, like, what's this weird job? How do you do it? Can you help me do it? And one thing about the graphic recording community and the knowledge working community is that it's super supportive. Like, there's no keepers of information, and like, technically, okay, you're in competition with each other, but people have such different backgrounds and styles that it doesn't ever really feel like that. And so Gavin sort of put me in touch with The Difference, who's one of the organizations Ian and I work for, who have these like big facilitation teams, and one of the roles on that team is graphic facilitation. So that's kind of where I cut my teeth, and it's an amazing opportunity as a graphic recorder to sort of come up in that world, because you get to do it with other people. So I got to learn from some of Australia's most experienced, qualified, amazing scribes, which so many people don't get the opportunity to do because it is such a solo job. And then after a few years, I'm like, I just want to do this bit. So sort of went out on my own. And so, you know, rather than the whole big event facilitation stuff, just wanting to focus on that. But yeah, that's my story.
No, I loved hearing that, because I feel like I've known bits of it, but I've actually never heard you put the whole thing together into one story. Or maybe I did when we first met and I'd forgotten it, but that's awesome to hear. Yeah, and so different. Similar in some ways. Like, I was also the kid that grew up drawing, the kid that got in trouble for drawing on every table in school, in every locker, on everyone's bag, if a kid broke their arm, on the cast, like all of those things. But it was never something that occurred to me could be a job. It wasn't even on the horizon. In the meantime, friends of friends needed pictures drawn, and I was kind of the go-to friend if you needed anything from, like, your band needed a logo, your band needed a poster, someone wanted like a t-shirt design or whatever. And I just kind of fell into that work very, very accidentally. And next thing it was I sort of worked in commercial illustration for 5 years before finding graphic recording. And one day randomly got a phone call from someone I'd studied with, who remembered that I could kind of draw, and she was doing events organizing in Johannesburg, and she'd had this crazy request from a client. They were like, we're having this massive conference and we want someone to be there drawing live. And everyone was like, that's nuts. I'm like, that's not a thing. And she literally was just like, she remembered this one person who's just like, maybe I think someone else would do. And I loved it. If I think back to that first event, it was ludicrous. It's still one of the biggest conferences I've ever worked at, even 10 years later. They had this massive space. I think there was more than 1,000 people. There were international keynote speakers, like top tier keynote speakers. And the amount of works, we just had these huge canvases, and I worked every speaker the whole day, like nonstop, didn't eat, didn't go to the bar, like, because I had no idea, and I didn't want to let them down, and they had no idea. So we just kind of did it like that. And then after that, it was kind of, there weren't very many people in South Africa doing it at the time. So I just kept kind of winging it from that point.
That's brilliant.
Which I think was why moving to Australia and meeting Jessamy, finding a community of practice here, it's something I don't take for granted, because it completely changed for me the experience of working in an industry. And I think it's super rare. Most industries aren't so niche that you can kind of know everyone by name and share work and support each other. But
do you think it's grown a lot, say, I don't know, over the last 10 years or so? Do you think it's proliferating? Do you think a lot more people in the corporate world are becoming aware of what a powerful tool it is? Is it a proliferating kind of expansion to it, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's always a tricky thing to measure, but if I use the measurements of like how many people at a dinner party are like, oh yeah, I think I've seen that before, it's definitely increased in the last 10 years. And I mean, certainly there are more graphic recorders. It's an interesting one because the skill of it, it takes time. So it's not like you can go, I've decided I'm going to be a graphic recorder. I'm going to do a weekend course and then be able to like start my career tomorrow. Because you could be the best illustrator in the world, but until you learn those like listening and synthesis skills, the value isn't going to be quite there. And conversely, you could be, say you've got a facilitation or a teaching background, and that stuff is really, really great. The visual stuff is also really important. That can be sometimes a bit of a contentious issue with it, is that you don't want it to fall off the cliff into novelty where it's like, oh, it's just pretty pictures. But when done well, it never does that.
Yeah.
But I think it is also really important for it to be beautiful, because that's what makes it engaging. It's what makes it feel credible. Like if you're looking at something that looks like it's been drawn by a 10-year-old, that doesn't feel like it's got a lot of credibility behind it.
Yeah.
And the other thing is it allows for longevity. Like I've had clients that I worked for 7-8 years ago, and I'll run into them at an event and they'll say, oh, I've still got your thing printed out on my wall.
Oh, yeah, cool.
Because they turn into beautiful artifacts that they want to keep, they want to show to other people, they want to talk about. So I think the aesthetic side of it actually is quite important, which can be, people have different thoughts about that, but I'm quite passionate about it.
It's really interesting actually thinking about it now in terms of, like you were saying earlier, so Jessamy runs workshops where people who are interested can learn, which are amazing, also highly recommend. But that didn't exist for us 10 years ago. And I think as a result, there's an industry of people where it's not as if you can take a course at uni or TAFE, really. So pretty much everyone working in this field is self-taught to a degree, and which means that you've got these kind of two schools of people coming from a facilitation background, learning the visual language, or people coming from an illustration background, learning the facilitation. And what that means is everyone feels like an imposter. Like either side of that, everyone feels very, there's like a sense that you know that you are blagging it a bit in the other field, and until your experience catches up with you and you learn that, and it all averages out, it all equalizes. But it's just quite an interesting dynamic, I think, that tension between those two. I was just going to say, it's also I think it's one of the gifts of it as a practice is it is firstly, like, it is something you only learn by kind of firstly putting your hand up to do it before you're ready. If you let your first mistake of the day derail that drawing, like you've got nothing. I mean, I feel like any graphic I look at, I'm like, there's 350 mistakes on that thing. And guess what? Wow. Everyone's happy. It's fine.
I love it. Yeah.
That's such a good point, Alice. And I think it's actually been quite transformative. It's those things that you don't notice, right, until you reflect back on it and you see how you've learned from those things and applied it across all facets of your life, because you're like, okay, I did the scary thing. Did the world end?
Yeah.
Like, it's kind of fine. You're like, wait, why didn't anyone care as much as they should have?
It's very empowering, isn't it? To kind of, pop out the other side in good shape. And I think you touched on this before. It sounds like you're a very supportive network of graphic scribers. It sounds like you all have this shared experience of all the things you've talked about. That must be very bonding and in a lot of ways as well. And I can imagine how supportive you all are for each other.
Yeah, it is. And it was also very intentional, I think, like, because we have this massive gift and privilege of this. I mean, I say it's a new industry. It's not really. People have been doing this work since the 70s, really, and the International Forum of Visual Practitioners, which is such a fucking mouthful.
Paintings, by the way.
Well, right, exactly. But I mean, since it was like a job, an industry around it, like that's our like global membership association. They formed in like 1995 or something. So it has been around for a long time. But in terms of like connecting up people and feeling like, okay, we actually have an opportunity that not many people get, in that we can shape our industry, at least for, our city, our country, the places we have direct access to community. We have that opportunity now. So that is something that I've been very conscious of, because my experience had been so generous with the people who were sort of that what's the word? Like that generation above me were so forthcoming with information and help and support, that I wanted to be that for my peers and for any people upcoming as well. And in 2019, a small group of us started Graphic Recorders Australia, which is the membership association for graphic recorders in Australia, funnily enough.
Yeah.
And for me, I was really passionate about doing that and really driven to do that, because I was like, we are so lucky. We have this thing already. We don't have to fake it or make it or like form a community. We are a community that's happened organically. But what structures can we put around that, and values can we try to continue permeating through the industry and through that community, so that that becomes, I mean, calling it formalized sort of takes the magic away from it a little bit, but doing everything we can to hold on to that, because a rising tide lifts all boats.
Yeah.
And in an industry that is still, you still will get plenty of people at a dinner party who's like, I've never heard of that before. And we forget about that because we work in it every single day. And because it is also something you're like, I don't know, is it pictures? I don't really get it, but it has such incredible value. Maintaining the credibility of our work in our industry is something that we're all responsible for, and all of us do so much better if we lift each other up and support all of us to be the absolute best at our work that we can be, which I think we do really well. And I think that's why I reckon Australia's got some of the best graphic recorders of anywhere in the world, because there's that really strong bond of commitment to the quality of the industry, not just the quality of each individual.
Yeah. I've known firsthand how amazing your work is, Jess, but Alice and I haven't worked together in the past, and I was checking out your work online this morning before the interview, and I was really blown away with how amazing it is. It's fantastic.
That's very kind. Thank you.
You're very welcome. And it makes me smile when I think of the community of scribes in this country, of which I've probably worked with, a massive percentage of them. And they're all just such legendary people. They're just their characters, their personalities are just so, they make you smile just thinking about them,
I wonder if there is something in that, because I mean, obviously I'm biased, but I agree. They're some of the most gorgeous people ever. Like, is there something about the particular personality of a graphic recorder that makes that true?
I think that there's something around, I think a career that self-selects for holding, I suppose it's like anything that's service-based, but this idea of like being in a room and of service to a group, where it's not about your ego, it's not your artwork. You're not there to paint a Mona Lisa. You're there to listen to others and to translate their words in a way that is beautiful for them. And I mean, again, I'm biased, but I do think that will self. That's not going to be everyone's cup of tea, and I think it does self-select for people that are curious about other people, other humans.
I know graphic scribing's the kind of common term. Could it be said that, there is now a healthy business art industry? Is it fair to call it business art? Because who knew that would be a thing?
Yeah.
I think we should ask the business owner.
Short answer, yes. I think in terms, we were talking before about how we've seen growth in the industry and how you measure that. I think a real part of the growth, rather than necessarily being in numbers of people, has been around the credibility of the industry and the understanding of where that value is. So what we've seen as well in the last sort of decade or so are increasingly there are embedded roles within businesses where someone is employed full-time. My worst nightmare personally, but some people have children and things. I don't know. But it is cool to see that that is becoming a more and more common thing, and That's it's amazing. Less considered, a novelty or like a compromise or something that you are going to, like, if you choose a career in the arts or something creative, that you don't also get to have a successful business in doing that. And I think you can call it whatever you like. I'm not precious about that in the slightest, but I think the that sort of collaboration between art and business. You see, same with art and science. That's a lot of the work that I do as well, is trying to communicate really important scientific concepts around, say, like biosecurity, which is a conference that I've worked on for a few years. These things that they need to work together. You know, you need to have that like human engaging side of things to be able to get the message across to people, and not even just to people who are sort of like outside your business or your service or the concept you're trying to communicate, but the act of simplifying something to the point that you can get a stupid outsider with no background in that thing to understand it is so helpful for that person too. It's like explaining something to a child, you know, like you have to really deeply understand something in order to simplify it and illustrate it. So the value there is incredible around comprehension, around engagement, around communication, around memory retention. I could throw 1,000 stats at you in terms of why it's so great. But I really think that the understanding of that has increased hugely over the last decade or so.
Yeah. The listening skills that you both have must be just dialed right up to 11. It's
but you can dial them right down again.
I was going to say, when we come home at the end of the day, I'm like, there's like a helmet on my head. I'm like, I need to not hear anyone's words just for at least like a couple of hours over a cup of tea, because it's also just like, by the end of the day, my brain is full of other people's voices, and also sometimes like not my own, because I haven't had necessarily like too many Alice thoughts in that time. It's been all about something else. So like Jessamy says, it can definitely dial it up to 11, and I'm super grateful to have a job that develops that muscle. But it can go right back down to 1 immediately afterwards.
Decompression time. I'm kind of excited for young people, let's say HSC students or whatever, of that, you know, late teenagers who have artistic skills, that this business art world exists. Do you come across a lot of youngsters who kind of go, wow, I didn't know this existed? And you must be very inspiring to a heap of youngsters, you know, who maybe are getting the chance to discover this work at that age, which, you know, how amazing is that in itself? Does that happen a lot? Are you both mentoring a lot of youngsters around that? I can imagine that would be the case.
Well, I've done quite a lot of work with mainly high schools, 1 or 2 primary schools, and increasingly so, because I love it. Kids are a good time. And like maybe in the teenage years, but they've definitely got a lot less hang-ups around just like grabbing a pen and having a go, which is great. But absolutely, like it's just, there's a whole different world of possibilities now. And not even just like for the kids who are like, oh, there could be a career where I can use my artistic skills that I haven't even thought of yet. But even for kids who don't want to do it as a career, just to know that there are different options for how you can do your own study, how you can do your own note-taking, that it doesn't have to be in this very regimented way. Like I had no idea how to take notes when I was at school. Like I felt like I looked around and like everyone else seems to know how to do this, and I'm trying to like verbatim write down, or like how to study, like looking at a book and then, I don't know, do you highlight bits? Like what's everyone else doing? I don't know.
Yeah.
But so I think they're the 2 things I've seen with young people. One is like, this could be a career, or just that there are options I hadn't thought of, whether it's this or something else. And the other one being, there is a different way for me to note take and study that works better for me and will help me to understand and remember it better. But working with kids is great. I love it.
Yeah, wonderful.
I've done less work with kids. I've done a few workshops with adults learning. I do think it would be a dramatic advantage to start younger in life, just because it's that thing of like, you don't know what you don't know. And the younger you know, all kids think they're amazing at drawing, and then something happens and they lose that confidence. So I think that would be a big advantage. But something that I would also add is just not being afraid of making marks on paper and in the world. Like, it's a technology that extends your mind. So being able to think on paper, like, regardless of whether it looks pretty or not, you know, people pay Jessamy and I, so like ours does need to look good. But that if no one's paying you, like, who cares if it looks like shit? It's such a powerful just tool to have in order to think and get ideas out of your head and move them around and see different relationships between things. And I think that, to me, is what is the most exciting part in teaching people. It's the most exciting part of the work, and it's sometimes the thing that can get lost if you're not careful. You know, to the point that we were making earlier around this kind of making it aesthetic enough to be engaging, but not so much that it becomes decoration. It is these graphics do work. You know, I kind of, the workshops that I've run, I kind of compare them to like a Kelpie or a working dog. It's like, they're not poodles. Poodles' jobs is to be cute, right? That's fine. And that's a totally valid job. And some art is that, like, it needs to look good. That's all it's doing. A Kelpie can be, it's still cute, but it also does work. And that's its like primary objective. And these graphics are working graphics.
This is why I love her so much. See, she's brilliant.
Yeah, she
Happy
is.
metaphors.
You're both
Always
brilliant.
puppies.
Yeah, that's an awesome analogy. Thank you both so much. I feel like we could dive like heaps deeper into this. I'm conscious of time. Thank you very much. I think just before,
thank you for having us, Ian. It's been such a joy.
You're very welcome. I think before we wrap it up, I just wanted to acknowledge how awesome your podcast is as well. Imposter Syndrome Club, which I'll put a graphic up for. I just wanted to acknowledge how honest and real those conversations are.
That's so awesome to hear, Ian, and it really means a lot. We love it a lot, and it shows. That's really important to us, and we love talking to you on it. And and this is what we get to do. Like, it's the best. Have deep reflective philosophical conversations with people we love. It's kind of the best thing ever.
It's very cool, isn't it?
Thank you.
Well, thank you both, and thanks to all the viewers who've tuned in to check out this episode. Really appreciate it. Lots of love to you both, and look forward to chatting again real soon.
Thanks so much,
Ian. It's been a pleasure. Bye-bye.
Bye.